Byzantine Museum. Welcome Note. Welcome to the Cultural Centre of the Archbishop Macarius III Foundation. We hope that your visit to the Byzantine Museum in our centre will be a unique and precious trip through time for you. 1,500 years of the history and art of Cyprus, but also of Europe, are ready to be unfolded before your eyes. We wish you a wonderful journey. The Byzantine Museum of the Archbishop Macarius III Foundation was inaugurated in 1982. It is situated on the ground floor of the building where you are, and it is spread out in 3 big dimensional halls. The Byzantine Museum presents the richest collection of works of Byzantine art originating from the whole of Cyprus. Its exhibits consist of mosaics, portable icons, wall paintings, vestments, ecclesiastical utensils, and wood-carved parts of iconostases, manuscripts, and other. History and art of Cyprus are unfolding before your eyes. Early Byzantine mosaics, Byzantine and post-Byzantine icons, wall paintings, and works of minor art. Cultural Centre of the Archbishop Macarius III Foundation. The creation of the Cultural Centre of the Archbishop Macarius III Foundation was an idea of the late Archbishop and President of the Republic of Cyprus, Macarius III. His successor to the Archbishop's seat, Archbishop Chrysostomos I, and the President of the Republic of Cyprus, Spyros Kyprianou, undertook its fulfilment. The establishing act for the foundation was signed in 1978. The Cultural Centre of Archbishop Macarius III Foundation consists of the Byzantine Museum, the Art Gallery, the Library, and the Publication Department. Historical background of the Byzantine Museum. The idea for the establishment of a Pan-Cyprian Byzantine Museum was conceived after the transfer of the administration of Cyprus to Great Britain by the Ottomans in 1878. A few years later, in 1883, the first archaeological museum of Cyprus, the Cyprus Museum, had been built. During the same period, the smuggling channels of Byzantine antiquities were thriving, with the most palpable example being the illegal excavation and smuggling of the 2 treasures of Lambuza in the currently Turkish-occupied district of Kyrenia. The need for protection of religious monuments and their portable objects was imperative. In 1920, the Holy Synod of Cyprus voted a regulation for the collection, protection, and preservation of the monuments of Christian art. It also stipulated the establishment of a Christian museum, in which the objects would be kept, and its direction by a degree holder of Christian archaeology. The first inventory of Byzantine monuments of the island was made in 1930 by Georgios Soteriou, a professor at the University of Athens, who also proposed the establishment of an office for restoration and preservation of Byzantine monuments at the Archbishopric. Thefts and destruction, however, continued, despite the pleas made to the population for preserving the monuments. For this reason, icons and other precious objects began to be collected and maintained in the Archbishopric and in the bishoprics for protection. The protection of monuments was intensified with the declaration of the independence of Cyprus in 1960, while in 1967 began the organisation of a big exhibition abroad, with representative icons from the whole of Cyprus, thus creating the first nucleus of icons of the future Byzantine Museum. In 1972, Archbishop Macarius III decided to establish a workshop for the restoration of icons and manuscripts at the monastery of Aios Spiridon in Nicosia, and to erect the Byzantine Museum next to the Archbishopric Palace. Unfortunately, the workshop was occupied by the Turkish troops in 1974, and this had, as a result, the pillage and illegal sale abroad of many icons, manuscripts, and other heirlooms, originating from the whole of Cyprus. The establishment of the Byzantine Museum was delayed and was fulfilled 5 years after the death of Archbishop Macarius III. Hall 1. The small icon of Virgin Blakanitissa, originating from the Church of Panagia Phaneromeni in Nicosia, dates to the 9th century, the period of Arab raids in Cyprus. In this iconographical type, the Virgin is represented in a frontal position and holds Christ in a circle in front of her. This type appeared for the first time in the monastery of Blakanez in Constantinople. If you approach the icon, you will realize that the figure of Christ is destroyed to a large extent, but the Virgin's figure is distinguished very well. The icon was executed in the encaustic technique, that is to say, colours mixed with wax, which were placed directly onto the painting surface, while the wax was still very hot and melting. This technique had been widely used in Egypt for the painting of the Fayum portraits. The iconographical elements of our icon refer to the style of these portraits, such as the big almond eyes of the Virgin. The two big dimensional icons, the enthroned Virgin with Carmelite donors from the Church of Ios Cassianos in Nicosia, and St. Nicholas Tistegis from the Hominin Church in Kakopetria, belong to the late Byzantine period, which coincides in Cyprus with the period of the Frankish rule and date to the second half of the 13th century. The two icons present iconographical and stylistic similarities, as well as similarities regarding the technique they were made in: golden leaf, egg tempera technique, and engraved plaster decorations. The sublayer consists of large boards on which a cloth is stuck and parchment above the cloth. The boards are hollowed in order to form wide frames on the two sides, and a three-foiled arc under which the Virgin and St. Nicholas are painted. Both icons are surrounded on either side by dividing panels, depicting in the first one scenes of the miracles of the Virgin, while in the second one, scenes from the life of St. Nicholas. It is hypothesized that the two icons come from the same workshop, due to the intense similarities they present. The icon of the Virgin presents a strong Western character. The Virgin is depicted in the Western iconographical type of the Virgin of the Mantle, who is covering, protecting, a group of kneeling Carmelite monks under her mantle. The scenes of her life are unknown in the Byzantine art, as they concern miracles of the Virgin of the Roman Catholic Order of Carmelites, and are accompanied by Latin inscriptions. The faces of Christ and Virgin are repainted and can be dated to the 17th century due to their style. On the contrary, the scenes in the wide frames of the icon of St. Nicholas are usual in the Byzantine art and are accompanied by Greek inscriptions. The inscription of the icon, Ios Nikolaios Tistegis, is informing us that the icon was made from the beginning for the Hominin monastery in Troodos Mountains. The donors are represented in the lower part of the icon. It is a Western family that is composed by a steel-clad knight with his wife, daughter, and horse. These two icons, the one with Latin and the other one with Greek inscriptions, validate the hypothesis that in the 13th century there were mixed workshops in Cyprus that painted for both the Greeks and the Latins. At the same time, it is ascertained that Western rulers showed their respect towards the Orthodox Church through subsidies and donations of icons, as it appears in the case of the icon of St. Nicholas Tistegis. The icon of Saint Marina of the 13th century originates from the church of Aya Marina in Pedoulas and bears relief decorations. Around the figure of the saint, scenes from her life and martyrdom are depicted in frames. Unfortunately, in many scenes from the life of the saint, there are extensive deteriorations due to the destruction of the sublayer and the painting on metal leaf. The figure of the saint presents an intense schematization, which is stressed by the red colour on the face and the lack of volume. The icon is characteristic of the artistic production of the 13th century in Cyprus, known as Maniera Cypria, a hybrid between the post-Komnenium Byzantine art and the art of the Crusaders. The icon is adorned with plaster relief decorations, with floral patterns and lilies, fleurs-de-lis, symbols of the French Lusignans, kings of Cyprus. The icons of St. John the Baptist, from the Church of Panagia tis Asinou, and Virgin Glycophilousa, from the Church of Panagia Chrysalineotissa in Nicosia, date to the 12th century and belong to the post-Komnenian art style, which produced several masterpieces of Byzantine art in Cyprus, such as the wall paintings in the churches of Panagia tis Asinou, Panagia in Tricomo, Panagia tu Araca, Panagia Afrentica in Koutsoventis, the Enclystra of St. Neophytus in Paphos, Aii Apostoli in Perachorio, Antiphonitis, and elsewhere. The characteristics of the post-Komnenian art, which will also influence the art of the 13th century in Cyprus, known as Maniera Cypria, are detected in the creation of the figures with the big almond eyes and the oblong nose. The icon of St. John is connected with the first phase of the wall paintings of Asinou, dating between 1105 and 1106, as it shows essential stylistic similarities with them. On the icon of the Virgin Glycophilousa, only the faces of the Christ and the Virgin are maintained from the phase of the 12th century, while the other parts have been repainted in the 16th century. The characteristics of the period are particularly obvious in the way with which the face is created, in the expression and spirituality that the figure breathes, in the arched and oblong nose, and in the shades underneath the eyes and lips. The two big icons originate from the iconostasis of the Church of Panagia tu Araca and are hollowed in the inner part, creating a frame around the central figure. On the icon of Christ, the figures of saints are depicted in the frame, and a dedicatory inscription is also written. When approaching, however, you will see that on the icon of the Virgin, the frame is not adorned with figures of saints, but with rhombs and lines. The marks of nails around the head of Jesus emanate from a metal nimbus, perhaps out of silver or gold, which was not preserved. Initially, the nimbuses and the covers of the icons were made out of precious metal, but after the conquest of Cyprus by the Franks and the awkward economic situation of the Cypriots, the nimbuses were made out of measly materials, like plaster, with which they created decorative patterns, and are then covered with a leaf of gold, silver, or tin. The exterior garment of the Virgin, known as maphorion, is decorated with 3 cruciform stars on the head and shoulders, symbol of her eternal virginity. The icon of Christ, which as you see is much better preserved than the one of the Virgin, allows the visitor to distinguish the ability of the artist, who in the case of these icons is believed to be Theodoros Absphedis. He is a painter from Constantinople who signs the wall paintings in the Enclystra of St. Neophytus in Paphos, and to whom are also attributed the wall paintings of the Church of Panagia tu Araca. On this icon, what is impressive is the use of adversative colorations, cold and warm colours, green, red, blue, and metals, silver, gold, which create dynamics and movement, intensified by the calligraphic disposal in the attribution of the hair and beard of Christ. This icon is considered as one of the masterpieces of post-Komnenian art. During the 14th century, the contacts with Constantinople are increasing, and the Paleologian art is timidly brought to Cyprus. The 3 oblong icons, which used to cover the pillars or niches of churches, are characteristic examples of this style. These are commemorative icons, which were made in the memory of the dead, depicted in the lower part of the compositions. The icon of Christ with angels and donors, which has the date 1356 on it, is particularly important because it is the only one bearing a date. On the icon underneath the enthroned Christ, 2 angels are depicted praying, and further down, the donors Manuel and Euphemia Zeros, with their dead daughter Maria. This is an icon made in the memory of the dead by her parents. The image of the dead follows the form of the portraits on the Gothic burial stones in relief, with the absolute frontal depiction of the deceased. The unusual oblong shape of the icon is also to be found in 3 other icons of the Byzantine Museum, from the Church of Panagia Chrysaliniotissa in Nicosia. In this church, dozens of icons had been gathered from many churches of Nicosia that were demolished during the Venetian rule. The icon is characterized by the modern innovations of the Paleologian art, which give liveliness and freshness to the composition. The luminous and glossy colors bring out the volume and garment folds, and they softly recreate the bodies of the figures by attributing their psychology with retained sadness. The effort is obvious for attributing the space and the third dimension, like for instance the figure of the enthroned Christ, which is attributed in a 3-dimensional manner without the depiction of his throne. The form of the deceased is attributed through the melancholic look, with particular assiduity. Her blonde hair is decorated with a golden diadem and prependulia, and her neck with a golden cross. She is wearing a dark mantle with golden floral decorations and a luxurious Byzantine orange dress with golden fishes, which shape rhombs and encircling stars. The figure of the deceased Maria reminds similar burial portraits in the monastery of Hora. The parents of the dead are wearing garments according to the fashion of that time. The mother is wearing a long black mantle, which covers the head, a purple headband, and a dark red tunic with golden decorations, and the father a black mantle and a purple tunic. Corresponding figures are also to be found on other icons of the Byzantine Museum, such as the enthroned Virgin from the Church of Panagia Chrysaliniotissa, and the fragment of the oblong icon from the same church, which are exposed in the same room. On both icons, the figure of a young girl standing appears frontally, presenting intense similarities with the icon of Maria. Plasticity of the bodies, the soft folds of the garments of the Christ and angels, and the warm colours connect this icon with the also oblong icon of Saint Eleftherios, from the Church of Panagia Chrysaliniotissa in Nicosia. The bad restoration that the icon of Saint Eleftherios had suffered in the past does not allow deducting in an absolute way that both works originate from the same workshop. Below Saint Eleftherios, young deceased figures are also frontally depicted, with their hands in crossways. The icon of Saint Paraskevi was made after the previous icons, and this is explained through its darkest colours. The slender form of the saint, holding in a medallion in front of her chest the figure of the deceased Christ in the type of Pieta, is to be identified with the day of Good Friday, and not with Saint Paraskevi, the martyr. This is a Cypriot iconographic type, corresponding to the iconography of Saint Kyriaki, the personification of the day of Sunday. In the lower part of the icon, a deceased figure is also depicted, kneeling in the supplication position, as he is in Hades, together with the dead Christ, and prays that the Lord will also resurrect his own soul. The diptych is one of the few works which survived from the Church of Archangel Michael, in the currently Turkish-occupied Lefkoniko. It was preserved as it had been exposed between 1967 and 1973 in the big international itinerant exhibition, Treasures of Cyprus. And during the Turkish invasion of 1974, it was in the Archbishopric. The diptych depicts 16 scenes from the life of the Virgin and Christ. The iconographical narration begins from the left with the prayer of the forefathers Joachim and Anna, the birth of Virgin Mary, the presentation of Virgin Mary in the temple, the Annunciation by the well, the birth of Christ, the presentation of Christ in the temple, the baptism, the transfiguration, the entry of Christ into Jerusalem, the Last Supper, the crucifixion, the Western type Assumption, the Pentecost, the Dormition of Virgin Mary, and the Assumption of Virgin Mary. Works like this diptych show the ways that the Cypriot and Renaissance style developed. as this work might have been imported to the island from Venice or any other regions ruled by the Venetians in the 15th century. The strong Western elements are the Gothic architectural buildings with towers, pointed arches, the one-point perspective, and others which emanate from the Italian Renaissance of the 14th and 15th century. The icon of the Deposition from the Cross, dating to the 15th century, is a processional and bilateral one, as on the backside of the Virgin Athanasiotisa is depicted, presenting extensive deteriorations. The icon is a characteristic example of the Constantinopolitan art of the Palaiologons in Cyprus. However, there are also obvious influences from the Western art in secondary matters. In the Palaiologian art, the figures are humanized, approaching more towards the classical idea, with the beautiful proportions. The figures are slender, and the garments which cover them are attributed with soft colorations, showing the shape of the body, while the correct placement of the light highlights their volume. The icon of the entry into Jerusalem, according to the inscription, dates to 1546 and originates from the church of Panagia Chrysaliniotissa in Nicosia. It is the established iconography of the subject, but in the case of the icon of the Byzantine Museum, the artist has placed the preliminary drawing vice versa, with the result that the little donkey with Jesus is located on the right of the composition, and the town of Jerusalem on the left. The town of Jerusalem is recognized by the circular building in the center, representing the Temple of Solomon. The representation depicts the triumphal entry of Jesus in Jerusalem, seated on a donkey, and followed by his disciples. On the left, in front of the walls of Jerusalem, a crowd of Hebrews is depicted, welcoming Jesus. Some children on the trees are cutting branches, while some others are laying them on the ground, together with their tunics, so that the donkey with the Christ pass above, according to the evangelical reading passage. In the lower part of the icon, the donors are portrayed, a noble family consisting of the parents and their two sons. On this icon, the resurrection of the Byzantine type is represented, known as the descent of Christ into limbo. The iconography of the representation is based on the apocryph Gospel of Nicodemus, where is described with many details the descent of Christ in Hades by the rightful Simeon, who was resurrected together with his two sons. On this icon, Christ is depicted in the center, in an elliptic mandorla in front of a big cave. He steps on the broken gates of Hades, and he is simultaneously lifting up Adam and Eve with both his hands from the open sarcophagi. Behind the forefathers stand the prophets and the righteous. On the left are depicted St. John the Baptist, Solomon, David, and other prophets, and kings from the Old Testament. Lower, in the center, the devil and Hades are represented enchained. The mandorla of Christ is surrounded by two angels, out of whom the angel on the right raises the banner of the resurrection, a white flag with a red cross. At the legs of Jesus, next to Adam, the deceased Monoikos Pelikanos is depicted, kneeling in the supplication position, whose family donated the icon in 1563, according to the inscription. On the icon, the Virgin is depicted in the characteristic iconographical type of Hodogytria, holding Christ in her left hand and bringing her right hand in front of her chest. Christ turns his look upon her, blessing and holding a closed scroll. In the corners above, the archangels Michael and Gabriel are represented, in half-length and with covered hands in the prayer position. The Christ and the Virgin are surrounded by flying cherubim. In a second level, in the lower part of the icon, in a green background, a church is depicted that is held by two angels. It is a three-aisled church with a raised central aisle, which has on its eastern side a high Venetian-type tower-like belfry. In the northern side of the church, the Virgin with Child is represented in the type of glycophilusa, in a blind arch, and underneath the dedicatory inscription of the donor, Vavas and his spouse. The couple of the inscription are depicted praying, on both sides of the figure of the Virgin, with the characteristic garment of the time. The donors of the icon might also be the donors of a church of Panagia that has not been preserved to present. The iconographical type that has been used originates from Italy. It is the Byzantine version of the iconographical theme of Virgin of Loreto, in which the angels are transporting, in a miraculous way, the residence of the Virgin from Nazareth in Loreto, in Italy. The representation of the Last Judgment is organised around the diagonal axis that is formed by the fiery river, which leads to hell. Above and in the centre, Jesus is depicted as judge, framed by St. John the Baptist and the Virgin, the apostles and an army of angels. At his legs, the symbols of the evangelists and the dead are depicted, expecting the time of judgment. Further below, the preparation of the throne and the righteous are represented. To the right is Archangel Michael, who raises his sword threatening a group of persons. The remaining part is covered by hell, with the depictions of the earth, the sea, the heaven, the torture of the sinners, and the demersal dragon. To the left lies the paradise, with Peter, the apostle, being in front of the gate and keeping the keys of paradise, followed by the righteous. In paradise, the Virgin is represented in a throne between the angels, Abraham having in his legs the poor Lazarus and other righteous people. And to the left, the good robber is depicted, holding his cross. At the legs of the Virgin is the donor of the icon, the dedicator archpriest Maximus. Underneath paradise, its 4 rivers are represented, while in the level below is the parable of the rich, being burned in hell, and asking Abraham to send them some water with the poor Lazarus. To the left there is a couple that sleeps on Sunday, being seized by the devils. In the last level, the souls of the damned in hell are depicted, in 5 chromatically different panels. On these icons, the astonishing combination of colours is impressive, as well as the various Western elements, such as the efforts for the attribution of the 3rd dimension and the anatomy of the body. They strongly remind the influence from the art of Renaissance, with which Cyprus was in contact. In similar way, the representation of the Last Judgment is also structured from the Church of Panagia Phaneromeni in Nicosia. On this icon, what impresses is the depiction of hell as a Venetian castle with explicit political messages for the enslaved Cypriots in the lower part, to the right. On this icon are depicted the Dormition of the Virgin, the episode of Gephonius, and the arrival of the apostles in cloud. In the central part is the Virgin in her deathbed. Christ is holding her soul in the form of a swaddled baby, surrounded by the aura and the angels, the apostles, the prelates, and the faithful. The episode of Gephonius is represented on the first level with the Archangel Michael, who has cut the hands of the sacrilegious that tried to reverse the bed. Higher are depicted the apostles, arriving in clouds from the uttermost parts of the world, as well as the Assumption of the Virgin. The donor of the icon is a young man wearing Venetian garments and is represented kneeling on the first level, next to the episode of Gephonius. The astonished building in the triangular shape in the background, which reminds us of the Rialto Bridge in Venice, the attribution of the icon's perspective, the bright colours, the naturalistic attribution of the figures, and the soft folds of their garments make this work one of the most characteristic examples of Cypriot Renaissance style that flourishes on the island during the Venetian rule. The saint is represented in a strictly frontal position in the golden background as a diminuate old man, with rounded beard, bald with intense cheekbones, according to his established iconography, as we know it from the interpretation of the painting art of Dionysios from Forna. The iconographical type of the icon follows the model which was established in the Cretan painting of the 15th century, known through the works of the painter Ritsos. St. Nicholas is depicted blessing with his right hand in front of his chest and holding with his left hand, underneath the tabard, a closed gospel with cover. The thickness of the pages of the Gospel is purple, while the cover is oyster white and is decorated with precious stones and golden lines. The saint is wearing his episcopal vestments, a red phelonion, chasuble, a dark ultramarine sticarion, rochet, distinguished by the opening in the neck, golden sleeves with crosses, and an ash-white omophorion, the feature of episcopal ranking, which is adorned with large black crosses, filled with golden colour. On both sides of the saint's head, the Christ and Virgin, with engraved aureole, are depicted on a smaller scale. In the golden background, half-length, looking towards the saint, offering him the symbols of his episcopal position. The Virgin, dressed with a purple maphorion, is offering the saint an open ash-coloured omophorion with 3 golden crosses, her hands covered under her garment. The Christ is portrayed to the right of the saint, wearing a purple himation, pallium, and an ochre tunic, enlightened with golden gleams. With his left hand he holds a closed scroll, while with his right hand, stretched towards St. Nicholas, he offers him a closed gospel. The careful geometrical precision of the golden gleams of the vestments, the representation of volumes of the face, through the harmonious unification of nuances, and the technical adequacy, so much for the painting execution as for the manufacture of the icon, are pleading for the icon's attribution to a Cretan workshop of the 16th century, which imitates the works of Andreos Ritsos. In the lower part of the icon, the donors are depicted, the parents and their son, with their hands together in the position of prayer. The males on the left wear wide rounded hats and black coats, and the mother, on the right side of the icon, holds a rosario and has the head covered with a white knitted headband, with a transparent white veil on it. The female donor wears a large black dress with a wide opening in front of the chest, covered with a white transparent garment, according to the fashion of the first half of the 16th century. The Annunciation of the Virgin is a work of the painter Emmanuel Sanfornaris, around 1570 to 1631, from Corfu, who lived and worked in Venice. The great number of Sanfornaris icons that have been detected in Cyprus, and the fact that he was married to a Cypriot, leads to the conclusion that the artist from Corfu worked for some time in Cyprus, mainly in the town of Larnaca, from where originated the family of his wife. The work dates to the first decades of the 17th century, a period during which he was not in Venice, as confirmed by the archival data. The work of Sanfornaris managed to partly cover the artistic void that had been created because of the desolation of the island from artists during the first 50 years after the Ottoman conquest, by renewing the post-Byzantine painting of Cyprus with elements of modern Cretan painting. The iconography of the Annunciation of the Virgin follows an old model that is repeated during the 16th century in Peribleptos in Mistra, in the Cyprus Museum monastery in Mount Athos, and elsewhere. The Virgin is depicted in the supplication position, with both hands raised up to the breasts level, and in an open book that is in front of her is written, "I do not know pleasure, therefore do not tempt me with treachery," which emanates from the Vespers of March the 25th. The representation of the open book in the Annunciation is a characteristic Western element, like for instance in the Annunciation of Florence of Leonardo da Vinci. Between the painting of da Vinci and the icon of Sanfornaris, there are iconographical similarities, as for example the depiction of the lectern, the posture of the Virgin, and the representation of the garden in the background. The art of Sanfornaris presents iconographical affinity with that of his teacher, Marcos Bathas, and through him with the great Cretan painter, Michael Damaskinos. The common characteristic of Sanfornaris with these artists is the way of introducing and using the Italian naturalistic elements, like for instance the soft folds, the attribution of perspective, the decoration of pieces of architecture and furniture, and other. Despite this, some drawing weaknesses are detected on the icon, particularly in the attribution of Virgin's legs. The iconographical model of the icon of the Annunciation is most likely the mosaic representation of the Annunciation in the Church of St. George of the Greeks in Venice. In the centre of a room, the enthroned Jesus is depicted, behind a holy altar, blessing his disciples to the right and left. The calling of the apostles is stressed with two golden inscriptions that begin from the mouth of Christ and end up in front of the mouth of the protopostles, Peter and Paul. In the lower corners of the icon, coats of arms are depicted with a rampant lion bearing a cross. Between the two coats of arms, the following inscription is written: Supplication of the slave of God Daniel, son of the deceased Bishop Petros, abbot of Amathus. In the post-Byzantine art, the iconographical subject of the communion of the apostles accepted many influences from the forced cohabitation with heterodox in the Venetian-occupied Orthodox places, Cyprus, Crete, Aegean, Ionian, and elsewhere. In Cyprus, the communion of the apostles was depicted in the arches of the churches, mainly during the Venetian rule, following the type of the double representation of Christ. The one-point perspective, the garment's folds, the intense colorations, the physiognomic similarities of certain figures, the good use of different artistic properties from the Renaissance and the Byzantines connect the icon of the Byzantine Museum with the 1502 exactly dated Italo-Byzantine wall painting of the Communion of the Apostles in Panagiotis Podithou in Galata. The slender figures of the icon, compared to the podgiest figures of Bodithou, as well as the 1494 dated wall painting of the Communion of the Apostles and Timios Stavros to Agiasmati, which most probably was influenced by the icon of the Byzantine Museum, are pleading for dating the icon in the last quarter of the 15th century. Unfortunately, the other elements that the icon offers, such as the inscription with the unknown Bishop Petros, abbot of Amathus, and the unidentified coat of arms, with the rampant lion bearing a cross, classifying the icon in the Venetian rule due to its Renaissance frame, do not give up to present any specific element for a more precise chronology. The pillages and slaughters that followed the complete conquest of Cyprus in 1571 by the Ottomans forced many Cypriot artists and scholars likewise to abandon the island. At the same period, the forwarding of icons in Cyprus is observed from Crete, the Ionian Islands, and Venice, like the icon that you are looking at, which was made in Venice. The icon depicts the Virgin and Child in the throne between the Saints George and Nicholas, in the Western iconographical type of the Holy Conversion, Sacra Conversationon. The donor of the icon is Protopappus Georgios, main priest of the Church of St. George of the Greeks in Venice, who emigrated there with his family from Cyprus. According to the inscription, in an open book between the donors, in the lower part of the icon are depicted, apart from Protopappus Georgios, his wife, Ashelou, and his son, Alosios, his brother, Frangiskos, with his sister-in-law, Florenza, and his nephew, Georgios. The icon was made in two different phases. The first one, during the 16th century, by a post-Byzantine artist-painter, close to the style of Michael Damaskinos, and the second one, during the first decades of the 17th century, by an artist who paints according to the Italian Renaissance style of the time. The icon has been forwarded after 1604, the date of the death of the last mentioned person in the Book of Donors, in the Turkish-occupied village of Atili. The detached wall paintings of the apse and the eastern vault of Aias Nikolaos Tistegis in Kakopetria belong to the Paleologian phase of the church and date to the 14th century. When the wall paintings needed to be detached due to humidity problems, a previous layer of wall paintings was revealed underneath, dating to the 11th century. Therefore, the detached wall paintings were transported to the Byzantine Museum, where they are on permanent display in a specially shaped space. The wall paintings depict in the semidome of the apse the Virgin standing in the position of supplication between the archangels Michael and Gabriel. On the left side of the vault, the Ascension is depicted, and on the right, the Pentecost. In the Ascension, the Christ, who is represented with garments shining from light, rises up to the sky in an elliptic mandorla, being held by 4 angels. The apostles are on the ground in 2 groups around the Virgin. The 2 olive trees on both sides of the Virgin imply the Mount of Olives. The representation of the Pentecost takes place in a gallery where the disciples of Christ were staying. The disciples are depicted seated on a synthronon, a semicircular bench with footrest. At the top of the semicircle, the first apostles, Peter and Paul, are portrayed. The 2 rows are supplemented with 2 disciples, young in age. They are all calm with a sweet expression and a contemplating look, and are holding scrolls or books. Between the first apostles, a vacant seat is distinguished. It is the place for Christ, the divine head of the church, which is represented by the Pentecost. In the upper part, the sky is depicted with the segment of a circle. Through this, 2 beams of rays are emitted, in a total of 12, going down towards the apostles. In the semicircular vacuum underneath the centre of the synthronon, the figure of an old man is depicted, with a crown on his head and a rounded beard, holding in his hand a bedsheet with 12 scrolls. The old man represents the world, and the 12 scrolls he is holding represent the universe, where the word of God will be preached by the apostles. Hall 2. A group of royal doors from the 16th until the 20th century present the evolution of wood-carving art from the end of the Venetian rule until the British domination in Cyprus. During the Ottoman rule, although the painting of the island is gradually demoted because of the lack of good painters and contacts with the great artistic centres, the wood-carving art is flourishing and is being influenced by elements of the Turkish Baroque and the Ottoman sculpture, such as the decorative pattern of trellis that is introduced during this period. The royal door is the name of the small door, constituted from 2 door shields, closing the entrance to the Holy Bema, and usually has the depiction of the Annunciation of the Virgin. The first royal door from the left, originating from the Church of Metamorphosis in Katomoni, belongs to the characteristic style of royal doors of the end of the Venetian rule that prevailed up to the end of the 17th century. Its door shields are shaping a high pointed arc with 2 foiled canted endings of the post-Gothic type, which is crowned by a medallion with the holy handkerchief. The arc's frame, the medallion and the panels in the lower zone of the royal doors are adorned with a plant spear, which is attributed in relief and in a flimsy technique, a characteristic example of the wood carving of the Venetian rule in Cyprus, 1489 to 1571. The shape of the royal doors, with the characteristic pointed arc, the iconographical order and the large diverting plant branches in the arc's frame, is to be found in windows, so much in Venice as in the Venetian-occupied Greek regions during the 15th and 16th century. In the upper zone of the royal gates, the Annunciation of the Virgin is depicted, and in the lower one, the 3 prelates with St. Nicholas. A similar decoration is to be found on the royal door of Pavlos Georgraphos, dated to 1659, and on the royal door of the 17th century, that was repainted during the 19th century. During the 19th century, the royal doors are representing 1 more row of prelates, increasing their number to 8, decreasing, however, their height by half. Characteristic examples are the royal door of 1852 and the royal door which was repatriated from Germany in 2008, originating from the Church of Ayas Therapon in the Turkish-occupied Agastya. Another royal door belonging to the same period and style originates from the archbishopric and is decorated with trellis. The royal door, which was also repatriated from Germany in 2009, originating from the Church of the Archangels in the Turkish-occupied village of Pigi in Amakostos, represents in full length the archangels Michael and Gabriel on the entire surface of the door shields, and diverting plant branches in the ark's frame. Similar royal doors, with full-length figures, but without wood-carved decoration, are those with the apostles Peter and Paul, dating to the 16th to 17th century. Jesus, dressed in white, is represented in the centre, giving his blessing on the Mount Tabor, flanked with the prophets Elias and Moses. He is surrounded by a round blue mandorla, with golden rays emitted by its centre. In the mount's roots, kneeling Peter is addressing Jesus, while the brothers Jacob and John are falling terrified in prostration in opposite directions. Of particular interest is the depiction of the donor in a small inlay at the legs of Prophet Elias, kneeling in prayer in her room. St. John the Baptist is portrayed winged and en face, blessing and holding a stick with a cross and a scroll, with the inscription, "Repent, for the time of the kingdom of heaven is near." In a small tree on the first level to the left, a pickaxe is laid, and to the right, the head of decapitated John is depicted in a basin, in the iconographical type of the oblation. According to the inscription in the frame, written in red majestic letters in the lower part of the icon has been donated by the nun Catalou. The iconographical type of St. John the Baptist is repeating a Paleologian model that was established by the Cretan school, with changes in the representation of the head. Sometimes it lies on the ground, sometimes it is in the hand of the Baptist as a head bearer, and sometimes it is not depicted at all. The icon of the Byzantine Museum presents resemblances with the school of Dionysios of Fauna in Mount Athos, who is representing the 18th century movement, for returning to the style of the Macedonian school of the 14th century. The painter of the icon seems either to know very well the way with which Dionysius works, or to use his preliminary drawings. On the icon are to be found the characteristics of Dionysius's painting work, such as the wide creation of the faces and the garments folds, as well as the effort for the attribution of volumes. So much of the stylistic elements of the icon, as the presence on the island at the same time of the monk Matthäus, Koutlou Moussianos, from the Mount Athos, 1714, 1730, and 1735, are pleading for the attribution of this icon to a Mount Athos workshop of the first half of the 18th century. The mosaics of Panagia Kanakaria belong to the early Byzantine period of the 4th to 7th century. Mural mosaics of the early Byzantine period were saved up to 1974 in 3 apses of Cyprus, in the churches of Panagia Kanakaria, in Lithrangomi, Panagia Kaira, in Livadia village, in Amokostos district, and Panagia Angelotisti in Kiti. Another badly damaged mosaic was found in one of the small conches of the northern chapel of Kurion Basilica, and is exposed detached in the Museum of Episcopacy. Sadly, the mosaic of Panagia Kaira was removed by Turkish smugglers after 1974 and is missing. The representation of Panagia Kanakaria had the same sort, but fortunately several fragments have been repatriated and are exposed in the Byzantine Museum, while others have been confiscated in Germany and will be returned after the trial of the case. However, a small number of fragments have been sold regretfully to private individuals and are missing. The only mosaic representation that has been saved in an apse in Cyprus is that of the Church of Panagia Angelotisti, situated in Kiti, in the district of Larnaca. On the representation that existed in the apse of the Church of Panagia Kanakaria in Lithangromi before 1974, the Virgin was depicted seated on a lyre-shaped throne, holding the young Christ in her lap. The Virgin and Christ were surrounded by a luminous mandorla, a characteristic of divinity, stressing the name of the Virgin as Mother of God and not as Mother of Christ, as the Monophysites called her. That is to say, the dogma is highlighted, as it was established by the Third and the Fourth Ecumenical Council on the 2 natures of Christ, the divine and the human. The early Byzantine mosaic representation of the apse of Panagia Kanakaria in Lithrangomi was incorporated and saved up to 1974, in the later phase of the church of the 12th century. During the period of iconoclasm, the mosaic representation appears to be covered with mortar that was revealed in the 20th century. It is the oldest mosaic representation of an apse in Cyprus, which survived on the spot. After the Turkish invasion of 1974, The mosaics were removed by Turkish smugglers, as was proved through court fights in the United States, and were illegally exported. In the conch of the apse, the enthroned Virgin with Christ was depicted flanked by archangels. The subject underlines the dogma of the divine incarnation, and at the same time belauds the figure of the Virgin, represented with Christ in a mandorla. In a broad decorative band, with an acanthus meander around the composition, 13 medallions with the busts of the 12 apostles and Christ, or a cross, were registered. Similar zones, with the figures of the apostles, are located in St. Vitale of Ravenna and in St. Catherine in Sinai. Stylistically speaking, the mosaic is between the classicized trend, like for instance in St. David in Thessaloniki of the end of the 5th century, and the trend for symmetry and strict moulding, like for example in St. Catherine in Sinai between 548 and 565. The representation of Canacaria has been connected with the reconstruction of Salamina after 526 and 527, and has been dated to the first years of the rule of Justinian, between 527 and 565. The destruction of the mosaic and the repatriation of one of its pieces. The mosaics were exported from Cyprus by the Turkish smuggler Aydin Dikmen, who removed them with the collaboration of the Turkish occupation army and sold them abroad. In 1985, through the mediation of an art dealer in London, the mosaics of the apostles Lucas and Bartholomew were brought back to Cyprus. In 1988, the American collector, Peg Goldberg, bought in Switzerland, with the intervention of a Dutch collector and an American lawyer, 4 fragments of Canicaria's mosaics from Aydin Dikmen, who was presented as their legal holder, for $1 million. She intended to sell them in the USA for the sum of $20 million and to give a predetermined commission from the income of the sale to the others who participated in the transaction. In the USA, Goldberg tried to sell the mosaics to the Paul Getty Museum in Malibu. The director of the museum, however, informed the Cypriot authorities. In 1991, following 2 years of trials, the Federal Court of Indianapolis returned to the Cypriot authorities the upper half of Christ, the head and part of the chest of Archangel Michael, and the medallions with the apostles Matthew and James, in a sordid condition. In 1997, the medallion with the figure of Apostle Thaddeus was repatriated from Germany. The medallion with the figure of Apostle Thomas, the hand of Archangel Michael, and the left palm of the Virgin were also found in the possession of the Turkish smuggler in Munich, Germany. They have not been repatriated yet. The medallions with the figures of Apostles Andrew and Mark and the lower part of Christ are still missing. On display in the museum now are the fragments of the mosaics which were found on the floor of the church following the pillage. The Christ, the Archangel Michael, and medallions of the apostles Matthew, Bartholomew, Luke, Thaddeus, and James. Semicircular showcase, exhibition for the 2,000 years of the Church of Cyprus. The exhibition for the 2,000 years of the Church of Cyprus was organised in 1995 on the occasion of the celebrations of Nicosia as European cultural capital for September. Here are presented episcopal vestments and ecclesiastical utensils, such as the archiepiscopal mitres, chalices, patens, crosses, flabella, liturgical fans, censers and other, as well as gospels with silver-gilded covers, embroidered epitaphs, wood-carved crosses and icons, testifying the long history of the autocephalous Church of Cyprus. The metal cross from the Church of St. George at Guri is distinguished among the exhibits, dating to the 10th and 11th century. Today, only one medallion is saved, at the crossing of the arms of the cross, depicting Christ Pantocrator in relief. Another 2 medallions, with the figures perhaps of the Virgin and St. John the Baptist, existed at the edges of the horizontal arm of Christ. High above, on the vertical arm, there is a figure of an angel. A significant example of silversmith and goldsmith during the Venetian rule is the Holy Chalice from the church of Ios Savas in Nicosia, which according to the inscription was made in 1501, for the now unknown monastery of Aias Mammas in Nicosia. That is known from written sources. Repatriated wall paintings. In 1997, 36 fragments of wall paintings were repatriated, which had been stolen from the Catholicon of the monastery of Antiphonitis in Galagrea, and had been transported illegally in Munich, Germany by the Turkish smuggler Aydin Dikmen. The same year, the German police, in collaboration with Interpol, detected another 300 works of art, wall paintings, mosaics, icons and manuscripts from 50 different churches. The accompanying photographs depict the wall paintings of the Last Judgment and the Stem of Jesse, dating to the 16th century, as they were before the Turkish invasion of 1974, and as they are today, after their illegal removal and exportation abroad. On the photograph of the representation of the Stem of Jesse, the fragments that were repatriated are outlined in yellow. The repatriated fragments of the wall paintings are on display in the wooden showcases covered with glass, as they were brought from abroad. When all the fragments are repatriated from Germany, an effort will be made to restore these 2 wall paintings. Permanent exhibition, Hostages in Germany, in the basement exhibition area. After the occupation of the northern part of Cyprus by Turkey in the summer of 1974, an unusual systematic pillage and destruction of the cultural heritage of the island, of the archaeological and religious sites began, as well as the theft of every outstanding form of art, from prehistoric period up to modern art. Over 500 churches were looted, destroyed, and used for impious goals. The holy places of other dogmas, such as the Maronites, the Armenians, the Roman Catholics, and the Protestants, did not even escape from this systematic destruction. The photographic material of the exhibition consists of the icons, the wall paintings, the manuscripts, and the mosaics that were found in the apartments of the famous Turkish smuggler of antiquities Aydin Dikmen in Munich, where they were confiscated by the German authorities, following a swoop by Interpol and the German police in 1997. The hearing processes of a case are time-consuming, as the German court, to which the case was brought, predicated in 2004 that the probative elements that were deposited before the court were not enough to prove the Cypriot origin of the works in question. The court was convinced that 169 excluded objects are Cypriot, but today they are still in hostage in the basements of the German police headquarters. Our confiscated treasures originate from 50 different churches in the Turkish-occupied northern part of the island. In the exhibition, photographic material from all the churches is presented, as it was before and after the pillage, showing the size of destruction. The presentation of the big smuggling case by the Turk Aydin Dikmen aims in reminding all that more than 20,000 works of Christian art from our country have been stolen and sold illegally by smugglers all over the world, and are illegally decorating collections of private individuals. The iconostasis in 2 levels is a faithful copy of the iconostasis of Aios Nikolaos Tistegis in Kakopetria, and is made out of oak. The manufacture does not include the royal doors that were located in the Holy Archbishopric, the crucified Christ, the Laipera, and the icons of Dodekaton, which existed in the museum. 2 adjacent wood-carved pillars were also made, apart from the exhibit model on both sides of the iconostasis, in order to support and implement the new iconostasis in the area. On the upper part of the iconostasis, the cross and laipera were added, that is to say the figures of the Virgin and St. John the Evangelist mourning, and underneath the icons of Dodekaton. The icon of St. John the Evangelist in the zone below belongs to a painter of the 17th century. All remaining icons, the royal door and the cross, are dated to 1627 and are signed by the painter Pavlos Iographos, the most significant and most productive painter